Behind a face that does not move, a man can think a great deal. People who saw me at the reliquary door used to believe there was nothing behind my eyes at all, that the crown had found a way to set a statue in a red coat, and that I had no more thought in me than the brass on my buttons. They were wrong, though I never troubled to correct them. The truth is that on the night I am going to tell you about, my mind was working harder than it had worked in 20 years of service, and not one muscle in my body let on. I was a corporal of the Caldmore household then, and my post was the door of the reliquary, in the long room they called the Lantern Gallery, deep in the heart of Dunhallow Keep. I had stood that door for 11 years. Men spoke of it as the dullest post in the kingdom because nothing ever happened there. A door, a lamp, a sentry, a stone behind a wall of iron and glass. Hour after hour, nothing. They did not understand that the nothing was the whole of the work, and that it was the hardest work I have ever done. Let me tell you about the stone, since everything that night turned on it. The hearthstone of Caldmore was a ruby the size of a clenched fist, and it had been the heart of the old crown for 400 years. I have heard learned men argue about its worth, and I have heard them give up arguing, because past a certain figure the numbers stop meaning anything. It was worth more than the treasury. It was worth more than the harvest of the eastern provinces for a generation. There were kings across the water who would have emptied their vaults and beggared their people for the chance to set it in their own crown, and there were men of no rank at all who would have cut a throat for a single chip of it. That was the thing about the hearthstone. It did not make men better, it made them want. I had watched it do this. I had stood at that door while honest stewards came in to take the inventory, and I had seen the inventory take something out of them instead, seen a man who had served the keep faithfully for 30 years stand a moment too long in front of the glass, his lips parted, his breath gone shallow, before he caught himself and looked away ashamed. The stone reached into people. It found the soft place in them and pressed. They did not give the reliquary door to clever men, or to ambitious men, or to men marked for advancement. They gave it to men they had tested and found to be made of something that the stone could not reach. I never asked why they thought I was such a man. I suppose a poor boy who grows up with nothing learns early either to ache for everything or to need very little, and I had gone the second way. I had a small room, a small pension waiting, a sister in the north I sent coin to, and a clear conscience which I had come to understand was the only fortune a man truly carries out of this world. I did not want the stone. I had stood beside it for 11 years and never once wanted it. That was not virtue. It was simply how I was built, and the crown had built its trust upon it. I tell you all this so you will understand what I was, and what Gideon Var believed he could buy. He came on an autumn night late, when the keep had gone quiet and the great windows had gone black, and the only light in the lantern gallery was the long row of brass lamps that gave the room its name. I had heard of him, the way everyone in those years had heard of him. Gideon Var, who had begun with a single coasting vessel and a head for other men's weaknesses, and who now owned shipping lines and ore fields and the mortgages of half the lords on the eastern shore. The richest commoner in 3 kingdoms, they called him, and they said it in a tone that was half awe and half something colder, because a man who has bought that many people stops being thought of as one of them. He had arranged a viewing. That was the word they used, viewing, as though the hearthstone were a painting. He had given a great deal of money to a great many people for the privilege, and somewhere in the chain of those people, decisions had been made that should not have been made, and a door that should have stayed shut to a private citizen at night had been opened. I did not know the whole shape of it yet. I only knew that the keeper of the reliquary, Master Edrin Holt, had come to me 3 hours before, gray in the face, and had said a thing he had never said in all our years. "Crow," he said, "whatever happens at your door tonight, the stone does not cross the line, not in any hand, not for any paper, not for any voice above mine. Do you understand me?" I told him I understood him. It was, after all, my standing order, the same one I had carried for 11 years. But I had served under Holt long enough to read his face, and his face was telling me that the order had stopped being a formality and become the only thing between the kingdom and a wound it would not recover from. I did not ask him what he knew. A sentry does not ask. But I set my back a little straighter against the doorframe, and I watched the far end of the gallery, and I waited. Var came down the lantern gallery with 2 men behind him and a leather case in the hand of the nearer one, and he walked the way certain men walk when they have never in their lives been told to stop. He was not large. I had expected him to be large, the way the stories made him, but he was a spare, neat man with silver at his temples and a coat that had cost more than my street was worth, and he moved through that ancient room as though it had been built to receive him and had been waiting 400 years to do it. He stopped in front of me. He looked at the door and at the iron and at the dark gleam of the hearthstone beyond the glass, and for a moment his whole face changed in a way I had seen on better men than him. The want, the soft place pressed. Then he mastered it, the way I had mastered 100 urges in that gallery, and he turned the want on me instead, which is to say he looked at me the way a man looks at a fence he means to take down. "You're the famous door," he said. I said nothing. I looked at the far wall over his shoulder, eyes front, as I had been trained, as I had stood 10,000 nights. "They told me about you," he went on. He had a pleasant voice. The pleasant ones are always the worst. "The man they can't move, the incorruptible Corporal Crow, 11 years at this door and never a mark against him." He smiled. "Do you know what I thought when they told me that? I thought there is no such man. There is only a man whose number nobody has bothered to say out loud. I have been called many things across a century's career. Most men, when they want to provoke you, reach for an insult. Var was cleverer. He reached for a compliment with a hook in it, and he dropped it in the water and waited to see if I would rise. I did not rise. I had learned long ago that the not rising is the whole of the discipline. A statue does not argue with the men who throw stones at it. It simply outlasts them. He studied me a moment, and I think he was, for the first time, mildly interested, the way a man is interested by a lock that does not open on the first key. "You don't talk," he said. "Good, I prefer it. Talking is what poor men do instead of acting." He stepped closer, lowering his voice, and his man with the case stepped closer too. "I'm going to be very honest with you, Corporal, because I respect a professional and I can see you are one. I haven't come to look at the stone. I've come to take it. Now I will tell you what I was thinking behind that unmoving face, because it is the heart of this story. I was not thinking about the stone. I was thinking about the case. It was the wrong shape for a man who had only come to look, and it was carried with the wrong care, held flat and level the way a man holds a thing he means to keep level. And in 11 years I had learned to read a man's hands the way other men read his eyes. The case had a weight in it. And a man does not bring a weighted case the shape of a setting to the door of a stone. He means only to admire through glass. So I understood in that moment more than Var believed I understood. He had not come to steal the hearthstone by force, with hammers and noise, the way the fools in the ballads do. He had come to steal it quietly and to leave nothing missing. He had a copy. Somewhere in that flat leather case lay a counterfeit hearthstone, cut and fired and set by the best hand money could find. A thing that would sit in the old crown and fool every eye in the kingdom for a generation. And he meant to make the exchange here tonight, behind the one door that the law said could not be opened, and to walk out of Dunhallow Keep with 400 years of Caldmore in his coat, while the kingdom went on bowing to a piece of colored glass. It was a beautiful plan. I can say that now, with the years between us. It required only one thing that no amount of money had ever quite managed to buy in a clean and certain way. It required the man at the door. "You're going to open it," Var said, "and you're going to step back to that lamp and you're going to look at it for 60 seconds, that lamp, not me, and when you look back, the stone behind the glass will be exactly where it has always been and the kingdom will sleep soundly and you will be a wealthy man." He let that sit. 60 seconds, Corporal. That is all I am buying. A man's eyes turn to a lamp. I have thought since about how he framed it. He did not say steal. He did not say betray. He made it small, 60 seconds, a turn of the head, nothing taken that anyone would ever miss, because the whole genius of the counterfeit was that nothing would seem to be missing at all. He had spent his life learning exactly how to make a terrible thing feel like a small one, so that the man doing it could keep his good opinion of himself. That is the real trade such men deal in. Not gold. Permission. You haven't asked the figure, he said, when I had stood silent long enough that a lesser man would have grown nervous. That's discipline. I admire it. Let me save you the trouble of pretending you don't care. And he named a number. I will not write the number here. I have never written it or said it aloud, in part because I am not certain anyone would believe me, and in part because a number like that, once it is loose in a room, has a way of staining everything it touches. I will only tell you this: it was not a bribe. A bribe is money. What Var named was a life, a whole other life, entire and waiting, that I could step into as a man steps through a door. It was my sister's house paid clear and a doctor for her bad winters. It was the small farm I had stopped letting myself think about somewhere around my 40th year. It was an old age with a fire in it and no fear of the cold. It was every door that had been shut to a poor boy from a poor street, thrown open at once, for a turn of the head toward a lamp. I felt it. I want to be honest about that, because the men who tell these stories afterward always pretend they felt nothing, that virtue stood in them like a wall and the temptation broke against it like surf. That is a lie, and it does a disservice to every man who has ever held a hard line. I felt the number go into me and find the soft place the same way the stone found it in better men than Var. And for the length of one breath, one single breath, in 11 years, I saw the whole other life laid out shining in front of me, and I wanted it. And then the breath went out, and I did not move. I will try to tell you why, though I am not sure the why ever quite fits into words. It was not that I weighed the wealth against my honor and found my honor heavier. Honor is too clean a word for what happens in a man at a moment like that. It was something nearer to this. I understood in that breath that the man I would be on the far side of those 60 seconds was not a man I could carry. I had stood that door for 11 years, and the standing was not a thing I did. It was a thing I was. Var was not offering to buy my silence. He was offering to buy me, the whole of me, and to hand me back a different man wearing my coat, and that man would have to live the rest of his shining purchased life inside my skin, looking out through my eyes, and I knew the way you know the floor will hold your weight that I would not be able to stand it. Some men can carry that and sleep. I was not built to carry it. The crown had chosen rightly. The stone could not reach me, and neither could he. So I gave him the only answer a statue gives. I gave him nothing. I think that was the first moment Var understood he had a real problem, and not merely a slow negotiation. He had named the number, and the number was the largest weapon in his armory, the one that had never failed to open a door, and it had struck me square, and I had not so much as shifted my weight. He had seen, I suppose, 10,000 faces change at the sound of money. He had built an empire on the changing of faces, and mine had not changed. The pleasant voice cooled. "You think this is a test of your character," he said. "It isn't. Your character was settled by the men who put you at this door. They decided long ago that you would never be more than a man who stands in a hallway. I'm offering to revise their decision. I'm offering to make you the only thing they never let you be, which is a man whose life is his own." He tilted his head. "Refuse me, and tomorrow you are still the door. The dull, faithful, unbought door. And the day after that, and the day after that, until your knees go and they pension you off to a cold room to be forgotten. That is the whole of the life they've measured out for you. I am the only man who will ever offer you another one. Think very carefully before you turn me down. Because no one will ever make this offer again." There was a truth in it. That is what made it dangerous. He had read my circumstances exactly: the cold room, the forgetting, the narrow life paid out a coin at a time. He was not wrong about any of it. He was only wrong about the one thing he had built his whole life on the belief of, which is that a man's price and a man's worth are the same coin seen from two sides. They are not. I had a worth, and it was not for sale, And the difference between those two facts was the difference he had spent 50 years refusing to learn, because to learn it would have unmade everything he was. When the money failed, he did what such men always do. He reached for fear. "I will be plain with you, since plainness is all you seem to answer to," he said, and the pleasantness was entirely gone now, and underneath it was the thing that had actually built the empire, which was not charm at all. "I own a great deal in this kingdom. I own men far above your keeper. I own the timber the keep is roofed with, and the bank that holds the household's accounts, and the notes of 3 of the lords who sit at the queen's own table. If you stand there and cost me what I have come for, I will not break you tonight. I will take my time. I will see your name set in a ledger of men who could not be trusted, and that ledger will follow you out of this keep and into whatever cold room they give you. And your sister in the north, yes, I know about your sister, will learn the kind of man her brother turned out to be. I can make you wealthy or I can make you ruin. Those are the 2 doors. There is no third door where you stand here being noble and nothing happens to you. Choose." I have been threatened by braver men than Gideon Var, and by more dangerous ones, men who had a blade in their boot and nothing to lose. Var was neither brave nor, in the way that matters at a door, dangerous. But he had found the cruelest thing in the room, which was my sister, and he laid it on the scale without a flicker, the way he had laid everything on a scale his whole life, and I understood, looking at him then, that this was the real face of the want, not the trembling lip in front of the glass. This, a man who would spend another man's sister to buy a stone, and would do it neatly, and would sleep. I will tell you the only thing I did in that whole exchange that could be called an action, because it was small, and because it was the hinge of the night. I did not speak even then, but I let my eyes come down from the far wall and rest for the first time on his face, just that. After all his talking, all his numbers and his threats, the man at the door simply looked at him, level and quiet, the way you look at a thing you have measured and finished measuring. And I let him see in that look that I had understood the case from the moment he walked in, that I knew what was in it. That the door he thought he was negotiating his way through had never, for one instant of the night, been open. Something went out of him when I did that. I watched it go. He had come down the lantern gallery believing the only question was the size of the number, and in the space of one held look, he was made to understand that he had walked his whole beautiful plan up to a wall, and that the wall had been watching him the entire time and had simply been letting him talk. He should have turned around then. A wiser man would have. But greed, in the end, is a kind of stupidity that wears a clever coat, and Gideon Var had never once in his life been stopped by a man he could not move. He did not know how to turn around. So he did the foolish thing, the thing his money had never had to do before, because his money had always done it for him in the dark where no one watched. He decided to take it himself. "Open the door," he said to the man with the case very quietly, "and do it now." And his man stepped toward the line, the brass line set into the floor of the lantern gallery, astride before the reliquary door, the line I had stood behind for 11 years, the line Holt had told me 3 hours before that the stone must never cross. I will not dress up what I did to stop him, because there was very little to it, and the very littleness is the whole point of the post. I did not draw my rifle. I did not strike him. A man who brawls at the reliquary door has already lost it, because the noise and the struggle are exactly the chaos a thief needs. I stepped 1 pace to my left, which set my body square in the door, and I brought my rifle down off my shoulder and across, level, held, not aimed, held, the way a closed gate is held, and I said the only words I spoke in the whole of that night. "The line does not open," I said. That was all. 3 of us in that gallery, and a fortune behind the glass, and a counterfeit in a leather case astride away, and the whole of it came down to one tired sentry standing square in a doorway with a rifle held level, saying 4 words in a voice that did not rise. The man with the case looked at the rifle, and he looked at my face, and he was, I think, an ordinary enough man hired for ordinary money, and he had no wish to find out what the unbought door would do if it were truly pressed. He stopped, and Gideon Var, who had not in 50 years heard the word no said to him by a man who meant it and could not be made to unmean it, finally lost the last of his neat composure, and reached past his man, and put his own hand toward the latch of the leather case to do the thing himself. That was the moment the knight had been waiting for. Not the offer, not the threat, this, the hand on the case. The greed at last made into a deed where it could be seen. The lantern gallery had not been as empty as it looked. I had wondered in the 3 hours since Holt came to me gray in the face, why a keeper who feared for the stone had not simply barred the viewing, why he had let Var come at all. I understood it now, with the magnate's hand on his own case and his man frozen at the line. Holt had not been able to bar the viewing. The corruption ran too high above the keeper, into the chambers where the notes Var held bought silence and open doors. A bought official can let a thief through a gate. What no amount of Var's money had been able to buy in the end was the one thing the whole scheme had to pass through and could not get around, the unbought man at the last door. So Holt had not barred the viewing. He had let it come all the way to the line, with witnesses set in the dark of the gallery's far recesses, and he had trusted his door to hold long enough for the greed to show its hand, and then to spring shut. They came out of the shadows of the lantern gallery as Var's fingers touched the latch, the keeper himself, and behind him, men I knew by their bearing before I knew them by their faces, the crown's own officers. The ones who answered to the queen and to no lord with a note to call in. There had been 4 of them standing silent in the dark of that long room for the whole of it, hearing every word, the number Var named and the threat against my sister and the order to open the door, and now they crossed the gallery with no haste at all, because haste was no longer needed. The line had held. The case had a counterfeit in it, and a magnate's hand on its latch, and 4 witnesses to the whole of his intent, and there was nowhere in 3 kingdoms his money could carry him out from under that. He understood it all at once, the way such men do, not slowly, but in a single collapse as a wall comes down. The empire of bought men had a hole in it exactly the width of one doorway, and he had walked his whole self into the hole, and the hole had closed. I watched the calculation run across his face and find no answer at the end of it, no figure, no leverage, no door, for the first time in his life, I think, a sum that would not come out in his favor however he turned it. They did not let him explain. The Crown's officers are not interested in explanations. That is rather the point of them. They took the case from his man and they opened it where everyone could see, and the false heartstone lay in it on black velvet, beautiful and worthless, a perfect colored lie cut to sit in a king's crown, and the sight of it laid open in the lamplight, with the true stone burning red behind the glass not 3 feet away, told the whole story to every witness in the room without a word needing to be added. And then they put the chains on him. I have thought often about the look on his face when the iron went round his wrists, because it was not the look I expected. It was not fear, and it was not rage. It was bewilderment, a deep, almost childlike confusion, the face of a man who has spent his whole life certain of one law of the world and has just watched the law fail in front of him. He had believed, all the way down to the floor of himself, that there was no door money could not open and no man money could not move, and he had built everything he was on the bedrock of that belief, and he had just been shown, by a tired corporal in a red coat, that the bedrock had a crack in it the whole time, and that he had built his life across the crack. He looked at me as they turned him toward the gallery doors, and I think he wanted to ask me the question, the real one, the only one, why? Why hadn't I taken it? He had named me a life and I had handed him chains. By the only arithmetic he had ever known, it made no sense. I did not answer him. There was no answer he could have carried. A man who has spent 50 years certain that worth and price are the same coin cannot be told the difference in a doorway at midnight. He can only, perhaps, begin to learn it somewhere in the long years the Crown's courts were about to give him to think it over. So I let my eyes go back up to the far wall, eyes front, the way I had stood 10,000 nights, and I let the last thing he saw of me be the thing he had walked the whole length of the lantern gallery to break and had not broken. The door, still standing, still shut, exactly where it had always been. They walked him out in chains down the same gallery he had come down, believing it had been built to receive him. The richest commoner in 3 kingdoms, who owned the timber and the banks and the notes of lords, carried out of Dunhallow Keep with his hands in iron, and a counterfeit in an evidence case behind him, undone. And I want to be precise about this, because it is the only part that matters, undone not by an army, not by a clever trap of locks and wires, not by his enemies, but by the one ordinary man in his whole long road that his money had failed to buy. Master Holt came and stood beside me when it was over and the gallery had gone quiet again. He was no longer gray. He looked at me a long moment, and there was a thing in his face I had not earned in 11 years of standing the door doing nothing, and that I had now earned in a single night of standing it doing exactly the same nothing, which tells you something true about the worth of a post that is all nothing until the one night it is everything. "He'll have offered you the world," Holt said quietly. It was not quite a question. "He did," I said. Holt nodded slowly. He did not ask me the figure, and I have always been grateful to him for that. He understood, as Var never could have, that the figure was beside the point, that a number which means nothing to the man it is offered to is not a temptation but simply a noise, and that the whole of what had happened in that gallery was that a noise had been made and a door had not answered it. "There'll be a reward in this," Holt said after a while. "The Crown does not let a thing like tonight pass unmarked. A purse, a commendation, promotion off this door if you want it, a warm post, a quiet life your knees thanked before they go." He glanced at me. "You could ask for a great deal, Crow, and they'd give it gladly. You'd be a fool not to." I thought about it. I will not pretend I did not. A purse is not a stolen empire. There is no crack in a man for taking what is honestly given. But I had stood the whole night being offered a life that was not mine to take, and there was something in me that had set hard against the taking of lives that were not mine. And a reward, however clean, however earned, felt that night like one more hand reaching toward the soft place, and I found I did not want any hand near the soft place, not even a kind one. "I'd as soon keep the door," I told him. Holt looked at me for a long moment, and then he did a thing he had never done in all our years. He came to attention, the old keeper, stiff in his bad hip, and he saluted me, a corporal, a man whose whole career had been standing in a hallway, and he held it until I returned it, and then he went away down the lantern gallery and left me to my post. So I kept the door. I kept it another 6 years, until my knees went the way Var had promised they would, and then they pensionied me to a small room, also the way he promised, and I am sitting in it now, telling you this. He was right about the cold room. He was right about the forgetting. There is no ballad about the man at the door, and there never will be, because the whole of what I did was to stand still and want nothing, and you cannot put that to music. He was right about everything, except the one thing his whole life was built on. I have had a great deal of time in this small room to think about the night the richest man in 3 kingdoms tried to buy me and walked out in chains. People who hear of it always ask the same question Var wanted to ask at the end: how? How does a man turn down a life? They ask it as though I did some hard and noble thing, gripped some great virtue, and held on against the storm. But it was not like that, and I will tell you the truth of it now, because I am old and there is no profit any more in dressing it up. I did not turn down a life. I already had one. It was a small life, a poor life, a life that ended in a cold room with no ballad, but it was wholly mine, every coin of it honestly come by, and there was not 1 hour of it I could not look at square. Var offered to trade me all of that for a shining life I would have had to live as a thief in another man's coat, looking out through eyes that had learned to slide past a lamp. He thought he was offering me everything. He was offering me everything in exchange for the only thing I owned that no one could take or buy or break. And a man does not sell the one thing that is truly his to gain a great heap of things that, in the end, would not be his at all. That is the whole secret of the unbought door, and it is no secret really, and it is free to anyone who wants it. The most valuable thing in the lantern gallery was never the stone behind the glass. Var looked straight at it and never saw it. It was standing in the doorway the entire time, in a worn red coat, wanting nothing. And that, not the ruby, was the one thing in that room that all his gold could not buy, because it was the one thing that was never, for any price, for sale.